Hello, in this video I'm going to show you how to replace your central heating pump. Now changing the central heating pump is a pretty straightforward job and should take around about an hour. That's providing you don't come across any problems and need to drain your system. So in this particular job I came across one of those common problems where the pump valves don't close properly and you have water coming out when I'm trying to change the pump. Now in this job I managed to do it without draining the system, and of course I'm going to show you how you go about doing that. I'm also going to show you all the common problems which I come across when I'm changing the central heating pump, like the nuts won't come undone on the pump and I've got to use a junior hacksaw and cut them off so I can get the pump off. Also the valves are leaking, and of course I'll show you the difference between the two different pump valves you can get, because it's important you know the difference between them. And make sure you stick around to the end of the video because I'll go through how you adjust the pump speed and then why it's important that you get that pump speed correct. So the whole world is going through an energy crisis right now, and I wanted to just tell you I've made a video called 10 heating money saving tips. Now these are 10 things which you can easily do to your central heating system and boiler to make it more efficient, which means you use less gas, reduce those gas bills and put some more money back in your pocket. If you want to watch that video, you'll find it in the cards above now or down in the description. And of course, share that video with your friends, so it's all going to save us a little bit money, make the planet a little bit greener and put some more money back in our pockets. Right, now let's quickly whiz through my speed up intro and get on with showing you how to change this pump. My name's Mark Ballard and I've been a gas registered engineer for over 20 years. The aim of my channel is to help you with your central heating and your plumbing. If you find this video useful at all, then please give me a little bit of feedback by clicking on the thumbs up, and that will also help others to find the video. You can click on subscribe if you think the video is useful, and click on the bell if you want to receive a notification the next time I upload a help video. And of course, share the video with your friends. I'd like to say a really big thank you to everybody who buys me a cup of coffee and leaves a small donation in my toolbox fund. It is really appreciated and it does really help me to make more videos, which will hopefully help you. And don't forget to visit my website where I've categorized all my videos and left links to all the products and parts that I recommend. Right, now let's get on with this video. Now the first thing I'm going to need to do is to turn off the power. Now what I like to do is to turn the programmer on so I know that the heating and the hot water is on, and if the pump works the pump's going to start running, but the main thing is I can see these lights are on. And then when I switch off the switch and remove the fuse, I see these lights will go out. I like to do it this way because some digital displays will stay on even when you turn the power off, so then it's unclear of whether you actually have turned the power off. And of course then you should use a multimeter and check that the terminals on the pump are actually dead. So now I'm going to cut the cable next to the pump because this is the incorrect cable anyway, and I'm going to be replacing it with some 3-core flex. Now I need to close both these valves here. So I'm going to use my adjustable spanner and I'm going to close them down and make sure that they are both shut. Now sometimes you have to do these really tight because they will sometimes leak. So I'm going to close that down, give it a good old nip up to make sure it is nice and tight. Now I'm just opening and closing it there just to try and make sure that it has got a good seating, and then again just give it a good old tighten up. And then I'm going to do exactly the same with the bottom one here. A little harder to get to, but again just close that one down, make sure it is fully shut. Now normally you can change the pump without changing the pump valves and without the need to drain the system, which in general will make the job nice and simple. But I use this video because it shows one of the main problems you'll come up against when changing a pump. So I'm just giving that last pump valve a wiggle. I'm making sure that it's got a really good seating because I don't want any of these valves to be leaking when I'm taking the pump off. There we are, that is really nice and tight. Now all I need to do is to undo the 2 large nuts securing the pump to the valves. That one there and the one underneath there. Now I just wanted to show you this other type of pump valve in case you have this one. So if you have a pump valve where it has a slot to close the valve, so just put your screwdriver in that slot on the front there, turn the valve around, but when you do there's a good chance it's going to start leaking. These pump valves are notorious for leaking, and you can see now I've turned it, you've got water coming out, so I'm gonna have to try and catch that water, and that water will probably keep on leaking out the entire time. Also when you reopen the valves there are a good chance that they will also stay leaking, so if you have this style of pump valve, be aware that they'll probably start leaking and you'll probably need to change the pump valves. This brings me on nicely to make sure that you have some protection on the floor. So make sure you got a bowl down, you got some towels down, because when you take the pump out, there will be water in the pump and that's going to spill out of the pump. And then if the pump valves leak like they do here and like they do on the pump I'm going to change in the rest of the video, then you will need to catch that water. So make sure that you protect your surrounding area. Now, I never use this style of valve because they are prone to leaking. But there are occasions where I have to use them, and that's where the pump is in a tight, awkward position and the pipework only will allow these valves to fit in, because these valves are shorter than the standard pump gate style valve. Now here's the new pump, and I've fitted the 2 gate valves onto the pump, and now you can see if I line up the nuts with the bottom nuts of the pump and we go and look at the top nut, it's about an inch longer. So the pump's going to be a slightly different place and the top nut is going to be further along the pipework. Not a problem in this situation because I have enough pipework that I can cut it back and make the new pump and valves fit. And here's that new pump and valves fitted and working. Now going back to my problem pump, now I've got to undo these 2 large nuts. Now this is always the hardest part of the job, is whether these nuts are going to come undone, whether the pump's going to move, whether the pump's going to start leaking, or the pump valve's going to move, because it's very difficult to try and hold the pump and the pump valve and try and undo the nuts. So I've got a large pair of grips on the large nut, then I use a second spanner to hold the valve to stop the valve from turning, because there's a good chance that when you undo that nut the valve's going to start turning, and then if that turns then the nuts might start leaking on the pipework, and we don't want that nut to start leaking because then we're going to have to take that apart to fix that leak. And then really you want a third pair of hands to hold the pump. So again, I've got my large pump pliers on the nut, I've got my other pair of pliers on the pump valve, and I'm holding the pump with my thumb trying to stop it from turning, and I'm just going to loosen this nut off. Now I always loosen both the nuts first of all, and then I'll go from there and see what happens. So I'm going to loosen both these nuts off and then going to give the pump a wiggle, because at the moment this pump hasn't moved. So the 2 rubber washers are still sealed and they're holding the pump in place. Now I'm just checking again that both the pump valves are loose or loosened slightly, and then I'm going to give the pump a wiggle which will break the seals, and then I'm going to rotate the pump around so you can just see it a little bit easier. Now just bear in mind your pump may not stay sealed, and as soon as you undo that nut you might find it actually springs apart. So I will never completely undo the nuts in case I have to quickly do them back up again if water starts coming out. I can already see there's some drips coming out, and I know that when I turn this pump, these pump valves do leak, and one of them leaks really badly. Now I'm going to undo the 2 nuts here, so I'm going to loosen that one, and you can see there's some water dripping out of the bottom of the pump valve. Now I always use my vacuum, my water vacuum, whenever I do a job like this, because I never quite know what's going to happen. And you can see there I'm undoing that nut there now, and now I've got water coming out of both pump valves. And you can see it's not just a little bit of water, it's a lot of water. You can see I'm trying to catch it in my vacuum, and I've got my towel there catching the water. Now sometimes the pressure will subside and then I can change the pump. But in this situation there is just too much water coming out. Again, sometimes I can take the pump off with the vacuum there and catch the water as it's coming out of the valves. But in this case there's just way too much water coming out. And if I don't watch out, there's going to be water dripping through the ceiling, and that is not what I want at all. So now I'm going to do these nuts back up again and go for a different option. In the comments you could leave me a little message just to let me know how you got on with changing your pump. So now I have 2 options. One is to drain the whole system, or drain the top half of the system, or I can try blocking off the loft tank. Now I'm going to plug the loft tank in this situation because it is way easier and it does what I need to do perfectly, and it stops that water from coming out, so I don't have to drain the whole system, which saves me hours of time. I just wanted to add, if you have a pressurized system where you have a filling loop and a pressure gauge, then all we need to do there is to drop the pressure on the system. We definitely don't need to drain the whole system down with this type of system. Now I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about pump valves, because that is one of the most important parts of replacing a pump. Now this is a 22mm pump gate valve. Now it's called a gate valve because it has a gate which opens and closes the valve, it goes up and down, whereas this valve here is called a ball valve because it has a ball inside there that rotates to close the valve. Now in general, these gate style valves are considered much better than the ball style, because if the ball style valve starts leaking, which they very often do when you turn the valve, then there's nothing you can do to stop it from leaking. Whereas the gate style valve, that has a gland nut and you can easily just tighten that up, or you could take it off, put some grease in it and then tighten it back up, and that would stop it from leaking. And that's quite common when the valve hasn't been turned for a long time. There's a standard nut and a 22mm olive on one end of the valve, and on the other end we have the large nut for connecting onto the pump. Now a new pump valve will normally get supplied with a fibre washer like this, but in general I don't use these fibre washers. I always use the rubber washers that come with the pump, and that is a much better way of sealing the pump and the pump valve. And the rubber washer is a perfect fit, and it means you won't have to do the nut up really tight. So they're just all round better. Now another thing about the nut on pump valves is they have this slot on the top. You see that little slot there? And if I turn the valve around, we can see another little slot. These slots on the nut enable us to take the nut off or replace the nut and put a new one on in its place. See, there's a clever little sort of magic trick. You just slide it in there like that and it just goes on like that. And there we go. Now sometimes it's virtually impossible to undo these nuts, and then I'd look to cut them off with a junior hacksaw because they've been leaking, or maybe just been done up so tight you just cannot undo them, or are maybe worried about disturbing other pipework and fittings. Then I'd cut through the nuts and try to cut where these slots are. So I'm just going to show you how I would go about cutting off the nut from a pump. Now this is a brand new Grundfos pump. This is a new pump valve and that's our old nut on there. And I've done that up really tightly. Now like I said, I'm trying to cut through where these slots are, but you can see the slot is there and the other one is kind of hidden underneath the valve. That's kind of typical. So now I'd look to cut through the nuts in a slightly different position. I'd always try to cut where it's nice and easy to get to. So here and on here. That's where it'd be easy to cut through the nuts. So that's what I'm going to do. Now this doesn't take too long to do because the nuts are made of brass and we're not trying to go too deep. Once I've cut one side, I'll then cut on the other side. Again, making sure that I don't go too deep. Then I just get a nice sharp screwdriver and put it into the slot and try prising it apart. Now this needs a little bit more cutting. Now as I look in, I see the nut move a tiny bit. I know it's now cut all the way through, and then I can just prise it apart like that. That way I don't disturb the pump or the pump valves at all. And there we go, just prise that off there. It's snapped on the other side because brass snaps very easily. And then I could just take the other bit off, and there we go. And you can see on the pump valve, I've hardly cut through at all. There's a tiny little slot there, but on the other side, there's nothing at all. So yeah, so you can see it doesn't damage the pump valve at all. And there's the washer. Again, there's no damage to the washer. And if we take a look at the pump, there's a tiny little mark on one side there. And on the other side, there's a bit more of a cut, but it doesn't affect the top sealing surface and it doesn't affect the threads at all. Now, just a little word of caution. When you go cutting these nuts off, you probably want to drain the system or drain it down to the pump before you go cutting them off, because once you cut that nut off, there is no going back. And if the valve doesn't close properly, like in this job, then you'll have water pouring everywhere and you'll have a nightmare. So now I'm up in a loft. I'm going to cap off the open vent pipe with this 22mm push fit cap. So that's that being pushed onto there. So that makes sure no air can go back inside that pipe. And then I'm going to use this bung and I'm going to bung the feed pipe. Now, if you want a more detailed explanation of how to bung up your loft tank and what you should and should not do, then of course I made a video all about doing that, and you'll find that in the cards above now or down in the description. Now I'm back in the airing cupboard. The system is still full of water, but all I need to do now is to drain the water down to the pump level. I got two new gate pump valves just here, so I'm going to replace the old ones and I'm going to put these new ones on in their place. Now a really good tip is to close the pump valves first of all, just in case water starts coming out. If they're already closed, then you're not flapping around trying to close them. So make sure you close both the new pump valves. Now I'm also going to make up both the pump valves so they're ready to go straight onto the nuts and the olives. So I use some joining compound now, and I just smear that around the seating where the olive goes. That's all we need to do, and you'll see this on all my videos. This is the way I always seal joints, where we have a compression fitting. And you can see there is a nice smear of joining compound all the way around the outside. Not too much, just enough that's going to make a seal. Now I'm going to do the other one like this. So again, do exactly the same. Just smear it a little bit all the way around the edge so it's ready to go straight onto the pipework and straight onto the nuts and the olive. And there we go, all done. Now, like I said, the pipework above the pump is all still full of water. So I need to just catch that water, and I do exactly the same again. I'm going to loosen off the nut and then going to let the water come out. I'm going to suck it up with my vacuum. You can see now that I've got the bungs in, the water is not coming out quite so easily because now there is an airlock and it's stopping the water from coming out. And you can see I'm just sucking up what is coming out. Bearing in mind the pump valves are still both closed. And there we have the old pump. You can see how dirty and blocked up that is. And that's why the boiler was kettling and kept shutting down, because this old pump is just not up for the job anymore. A very important point, make sure you know which way the pump was facing. So you have an arrow on the pump there and it's pointing in the direction of the flow. So make sure that when you come to put your new pump in, you know which way round it was facing and you face the pump in exactly the same direction. Otherwise you will get all sorts of problems. Now, if for some reason you can't see which way your pump is facing, you can't see the arrow on it, then you can always tell which way around the pump is because of this fat bulbous area here. This part is always on the return side, so the other outlet will be on the flow side. Now, this next bit is really interesting. So you know that the loft tank is now bunged up, both the pump valves are fully closed. And now I'm going to open this valve to drain the water out, which is above the pump. Now, when I open this top valve, it breaks the airlock and you'll see water start bubbling out of the bottom valve. So that's the valve that was faulty. You'll see the water starts coming out pretty quickly. So this is where my water vacuum comes in really handy. I wouldn't try doing a job like this anymore without using my vacuum. I would be in all sorts of trouble now. If you want to know what vacuum I've got, of course I made a video about that, and again you'll find that in the description below. Now the water keeps coming out because what you didn't see was I loosened the top nut on the top valve because I was going to take it off. So that's broken the airlock and there's air being constantly sucked in through that nut. But now I've tightened it up and it stopped it from coming out of that bottom valve. Just going to remove that towel because that is now soaking wet. And that brings me on to the important point. Make sure that you put lots of towels down and protection on your carpet, because the last thing you want is to make stains on your carpet and have water pouring through your ceiling. And you can see from this job how easily it could happen. Although I must say this is one of the worst ones which I've come across. So now I'm going to take that bottom valve off because that is the valve that is giving us all the problem. So I'll just loosen that nut right up there on the bottom. I'm now pretty sure that I've sucked up all the water from the pipework which is above the pump. So I'm just going to remove this valve now and see if we got any water. And no, that's it. All the water has now gone. Now I'm just going to use my vacuum, just give it a quick little suck just to make sure that there's nothing's going to come out. And there we go. But still, when we're doing this, we don't really want to hang around because I haven't drained the system and there's still radiators which are full of water. So now I'm going to remove this olive and remove the old nut. Now you can get special tools to cut them off, but I'm just going to show you if you get a pair of pliers and you just wiggle that olive backwards and forwards, then normally you'll be able to just give it a wiggle and pull it off the pipework. Now I'm just wiggling that around like that, and you can see that came off pretty easily. There we go. That's that old olive taken off now. Then we can remove the nut. And now I can clean that bit of pipework up to put a new olive and nut on. Just a quick note, I have still got the other valve on and that nut is done up and the valve is closed. If I remove it, there's a possibility that I'll break the airlock and then I'll get water coming out of both the pipes or one of the pipes. So always keep one of the valves on and just do one valve at a time. So now I'm just cleaning up that bit of pipe work with some special pipe cleaning emery, like that. Now I'm just going to use my inspection mirror just to check round the back, just to make sure there's no dents or nasty little scratches in the pipework, which there's not, so that's all good. I can now put the nut on, and I'll show you how I would put an olive on by using PTFE tape. So I've got the olive on there. So in case you haven't got joining compound, you can use PTFE tape. So we want to just wrap the PTFE tape around the olive. You don't need to go around the threads or anything like that. This is just the olive. So we just wrap it around 3, 4, 5, 6 times. Not too much that it's going to affect you how you get it together, but just a good few winds around, and then pull it tight and then wrap it around. And there we go. So that's now ready for the valve. Now here's the valve. I've cleaned off the joining compound. So now I can just push that down onto the olive and the PTFE tape, give it a little wiggle so it pushes down until it stops, and then I can then do up the nut like that. After I've done it hand tight, I can then nip it up with a spanner, and then I'm going to use 2 spanners, one to hold the valve and the other spanner to do up the nut and nice and tight. And there we go, the bottom valve is now all done. So the bottom valve is now closed, and I can now remove this top valve. Now I'm going to remove that. Obviously it wasn't tight, so I can just undo that quite easily. Now there may be some water still in here, so I'm going to use my vacuum and just catch any water that might be in the pipework. And there you see there's a little bit in there, but nothing much to worry about. Then I'm going to grab that olive, give it a wiggle, pull it down, and then take that olive off, and then take the nut off. Obviously give the pipework a bit of a clean, make sure that there's no nasty scratches or dents, and that's all fine. Now I can put the nut on and the olive, and then because I'm using joining compound, I can just push the valve up onto there and then do it up tight with my grips and my adjustable spanner. So that's both valves now complete. Now just a little tip, make sure that when you put them on, then you can access the valves so you can turn them on and off. And also for maintenance, make sure it's easy to get to them, because there's no point putting them in a really hard place or pointing them in the wrong direction so you can't get to the nuts easily, because there is a chance that you will need to service them at some point in the future. So now I'm ready to fit my pump, and I'll put my pump valve nuts on, and I've got my 2 rubber washers, and I'm going to put the pump in position, make sure it's pointing in the right direction. I slide the first washer in, and then I do up the nuts. That'll just hold it all in place. There we go, that's in place now. I can slide my other rubber washer in. Now if you find it's a really tight fit to get your pump in, which is often the case, then it's just a case of trying to prise it apart. Maybe just wedge a little screwdriver in between the pump and the pump valve, and that holds it apart, and then slide your washer in. You want to make sure that washer goes in there nice and square, because it is possible that it can kink and it can go in the wrong position and leak, and of course we don't want any leaks. Once you've got the 2 washers in and the nuts done up hand tight, it's then just a case of doing up the 2 nuts with your pump pliers. Now you don't want to go really crazy with this, you just want to nip them up, because these are rubber washers and they're going to take up any play, and then in the future you may want to take it apart again, and it really annoys me when people have done them up so tight that you just cannot undo them. Now before I wire it up, because that's going to take a little while, I'm going to open both the pump valves, and that will just make sure that I don't have any leaks. I don't know if you noticed then, but when I finished opening the valve, I also nipped up the gland nut. So now I'm going to go up to the loft tank and remove both the bungs, and the loft tank will just refill the system. Now they're both removed, I can see the float valve has dropped a little and it's starting to refill the system. Now I'm just going to give the pump a quick check to make sure there's no leaks coming from the valves or the nuts, so they're all good. Now it's just a case of wiring it up. Now not all pumps have a plug like this one, and it's just a case of wiring up the live, neutral and the earth. So we've got the 3 core flex, which is 0.75 and also heat resistant. I'm going to wire that into this pump plug. Now I'm not going to go into this in detail because it's just a live, neutral and an earth, but do make sure that you get the wires in the correct terminals. Once it's wired up, I just need to put the cover on, do up the screw and then do up the flex retaining nut. Now I can just plug it into the pump, and it's just a case of then wiring it into the wiring center. Now you may be able to use the wire that was already on your pump, but in this case I'm taking out the old cable and replacing it with the flex. Now if you need to do this, it's a really good idea to take a photo on your phone so you can make sure you know where all the wires go, and I always just remove one wire at a time and replace it with a new wire from the new pump flex. That way you shouldn't get it wrong. Now it's just a case of putting the cover back on the wiring box and testing the pump. So I'm going to switch the power back on and then turn on the heating and the hot water and check that the pump is running. Now, depending on the pump you're using depends on how you adjust the speed that it runs at. Most pumps will give us 3 pump speeds. Now this one here is just a button which you press to adjust the speed of the pump. You may find there's a lever or a dial that you can adjust the speed with. Now a lot of pumps these days, they have additional settings on which we can use for different types of system. But every system is slightly different and these settings can be more complicated, so it's important that we set those correctly, and they're going to be for another video altogether. Even setting one of the 3 speeds correctly can be a bit tricky. Too slow a pump speed and the system won't get hot enough. Too high a pump speed and you may find you get something called pump over, where water gets pumped into the loft tank, or possibly air being drawn into the system. Both these issues can be really bad for your system. Now these Grundfos pumps are more powerful than the old pumps. So you can try setting the pump to number 1 and then go around and check how warm your radiators are and listen to your boiler and make sure that it's not kettling. That's when you might hear some knocking or bumping coming from the boiler. If you find all the radiators aren't heating up, then try setting it on number 2. Or if you hear the boiler is making a kettling sound, then maybe again try setting number 2. And finally, you could try setting number 3 if you find your boiler still bumping a bit and you still got a few radiators which are cold. You might want to just listen in your airing cupboard and make sure that you don't hear any air being sucked around or trickling sounds. And you could go up in the loft tank and just check when you put your hot water on that you don't see water coming out of the open vent pipe. So if in doubt, always call a heating engineer. So now this old boiler has been given a few more years of life. You can see the power is on and the boiler is now running with the burner on. The boiler has stopped overheating, so the pump was definitely the issue. So I'm happy with that. So now we've got a happy customer with a nice warm house. Right, that's about it then. So I do hope my video has been helpful to you. If you want to watch my next video, then you can click on the link just here. And if you found my video helpful in any way, then please give me that little bit of feedback by clicking on that thumbs up. And like I said, that will help others to find the video. And if you enjoyed the video, then you can click on subscribe. And if you want to receive a notification the next time I upload a help video, then click on that bell. And of course, share the video with your friends. And if you want to buy me a cup of coffee, I'd like to say a really big thank you to everybody who's left a donation in my Toolbox Fund. It's really appreciated and it helped me to make more videos, which will hopefully help you. Bye for now, and I'll see you next time.